opportunity to get into your word here this morning. Pray that you challenge and encourage us as we do so, we pray. In Jesus' name. Amen. Well, you can, if you don't have one of the sheets in the back, it might be helpful, only because we're going to be looking at like 3 different passages almost at once. So, do you need an extra one? Yes. You guys need another one up there? Anybody else need one? Okay, you're good. You got one? If you have a pen or something, jot down any thoughts as we kind of go through this. We're going to be doing some stuff together here as I do this here. So we're kind of going through this topic. So this is a topic that we're actually going to be doing pretty much all day. And this is a passage. We're going to kind of take different chunks of this passage as we go through this. I'm really focusing more on the Luke passage in the sense of the chronology of some of this. If you look at Mark and Matthew, this is synoptics. It's in all 3 of these. It's not in John. None of these stories that we're going to look at are specifically stated in John. So if you see on your page to the far right, it just says John there, and there's nothing underneath John. So I just put that there. It's actually really neat. There's an online tool where you can go to, I'm trying to remember the website name, but basically it's Synoptic Gospels, where the different stories, they have the different, Gospels that have those chunks of that story, or whatever. And it's kind of neat to see that as you go through. We're going to be doing a little bit of that today. There's one in the bulletin as well for this morning's service. And really the theme is the overarching theme. There's different specific themes to look at. But the overarching theme is the idea of spiritual showmanship. I think sometimes as Christians, we can really, unfortunately, associate with the aspect of outward show versus inward relationship. Okay? Now, obviously, if you have an inward relationship, it does affect your outward show because there are probably going to be things you're doing and not doing because of a relationship. But very quickly and unfortunately all too often, we do things only because of outward show. And Christ got on the Pharisees especially about this. The Sadducees, Christ actually didn't really interact with them as much until later on in his ministry. And there's actually a little video clip that kind of explains some of that. It's really neat. So I thought I'd include that as well. But here in our passage in Luke 5, we're going to read through the passage in Luke. I'm not going to necessarily do the whole passage. We're just going to stop with actually going to go down through verse 39 particularly, because there's something that I believe has an overarching principle for all of these stories that we're looking at. And hopefully it will be helpful for us. So Luke 5 there, as I'm looking it up, I have the other sheet in front of me. We're going to be reading down through verse 39. So it's not on the sheet. It only goes through verse 32. So if you have it there in the scriptures, if you want to open that up to Luke 5, and we'll go ahead and read this passage around. I'll go ahead and start here. Luke 5, verse 27. And we'll read until we go down to the end of the chapter, which is verse 39. Okay? Luke 5, 27 says this. It says, after these things, he went forth and saw a publican named Levi sitting at the receipt of custom, and he said unto him, follow me.
And leaving everything, he rose and followed.
And Levi made him a great feast in his own house, and there was a great company of publicans and of others that sat down with them.
And the Pharisees and their scribes began grumbling at the disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with the tax gatherers and sinners?
And Jesus answering said unto them, they that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick.
I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance.
And they said unto him, why did the disciples of John fast often and make prayers, and likewise the disciples of the Pharisees? But thine eat and drink.
Would you like to read verse 34? So.
And Jesus said to them, you make white vests fast while the bridegroom is with you.
Okay. Verse 35 says, but the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days.
And he also told them the parable. No one tears a piece from a new garment, puts it on an old garment. If he does, he will tear the new
we're going to start, we'll look through this passage, and we're going to take some time here today to, interject thoughts as we look through this passage, the parallel passage there, about this particular thing, and we're going to draw some conclusions from that. But I wanted to start with verses 36 to 39. You have it there, Luke 5, verses 36 to 39, which is not on the sheet that you have before you. There it gives an illustration. The illustration is very simply an old new garment, an old cloth, new garment, etc. I mean, obviously the old being put on the new, and then it says that the new being put on the old, excuse me, and then the old basically tears and more is taken away from it. But instead, in each one of these, the specific application being made that new has to go with new, old goes with old. Can I ask you this question? Why is Christ bringing this parable in this story? It actually fits right in the kernel. It fits right in the middle of both of these stories that we're going to be looking at today. Why? What is he talking about here? Why, in context, what is this dealing with? What's the new? What's the old?
You talk the Old and New Testament?
Okay. I do think there's a parallel to that, in particular, the Old and New Testaments. It kind of flows out to a lot of other things. Any other thoughts? I mean, Christ put it here for a reason. He didn't waste words. He gave a parable. What was he trying to say?
Kind of looking at it like, you got to shed the old man, get rid of him, before you can bring the new into you, being the Holy Spirit.
Okay. So the old and new, maybe old man, new man. Any other thoughts? I want you to kind of keep that in your mind as we go through this, because I think it's helpful, it's important, and furthermore, I challenge you to kind of look that up a little bit more. What does that mean? What's the old and new? What are we talking about here? Rather than just giving you answers, I'm going to kind of put that out for you, because I think it sets the tone for all of the rest of what we're going to look at. And so we're going to kind of look through some different things here. Before we get into our specific passage and actually looking through each one of these parallel passages, does anybody know the difference between a Pharisee and a Sadducee? Somebody once said, well, the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection, that's why they're sad, you see. I thought it was wonderful.
The Pharisees, they were the priestly, the temple priests.
Yeah, actually Sadducees was more the temple.
Sadducees?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm thinking,
No, but-
I'm thinking.
This is what I think it's good to kind of just kind of think through that a little bit. I had honestly, just so you know, I had to kind of do a lot of research to make sure I'm thinking right on some of this stuff, and it was good. I think they cross over in our minds. I think that's why I'm asking some of these questions. Here's some simple thoughts here that kind of help out with Sadducees and Pharisees, because we're really dealing with Pharisees in our passage. Okay, so just so we're aware of that. Pharisees kind of would have more to do with the law, especially interpretations of oral traditions based on the law. Okay, they were actually the ones to the Mishnah and other things, which are the teachings off of the Old Testament. They were the ones that kind of did that and preserved a lot of that. They were really into that. It wasn't so much about the law itself; it was more about what people said about the law. So it's more interpretation than it is what the law actually says. Whereas the Sadducees would actually go the other way. They were very, very specific about Torah alone, and they would go against, obviously, what a lot of people would teach based on what the scriptures taught, and I think that's a good thing. If you want to put labels on them, I guess Sadducees are actually typically more conservative. Pharisees would be seen as more liberal in their day. The Sadducees spent a lot more time in the temple. They were the upper echelon, upper class. The Pharisees actually spent a lot more time in the synagogues. Okay, so kind of the local churches, as it were, in their day. Middle class versus upper class. Pharisees believed in the resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. That's why they were Sadducees. So if you remember that, that kind of helps you a little something there. Belief in the afterlife for the Pharisees, and the Sadducees really didn't. Once you die, you die. You went in the grave, you're done. And then the Pharisees rejected the Jewish leaders, But the Sadducees were kind of more political. They supported Jewish leaders. They were, in fact, they didn't get involved in Christ's life until closer to the end of his life. You're going to see that in the video as well. Due to the fact that what Christ was doing did not affect politically anything until a little later in his life when they started to realize the implications of, this is going to affect our relationship with those that are around, and it's going to affect things. And so it would affect their position, and so that's the reason why they got involved in what was going on. The Pharisees were kind of involved from the get-go, and you see them a lot early on in Christ's ministry. So, just a little thought there. I do have a little brief video clip here. And it's not going to play this out. That's interesting. Well, I'm going to, maybe I'll show that video a little later, okay? I guess we'll just get into our passage. It's a really neat video, because it kind of just gives some summary of what I just talked about and some of that we looked at. I guess it's not essential necessarily for what we're doing here, but I thought it was really, really helpful. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to look through this passage, and I am specifically looking at this idea or this mindset as I go through here. Spiritual showmanship. The Pharisees were concerned about what people thought on the outside. That was their concern. How people perceived them, how people viewed them. If you look at Matthew 6, where Christ challenges his disciples and others not to be like the Pharisees, he said, don't pray in the streets so that you can be seen of men. Don't give your alms before men so that you can be seen of men. He's not condemning public prayer. He's not condemning giving that is visible. He's condemning the aspect of doing it for show, which is exactly what the Pharisees did. In fact, they would fast twice a week, but they let people know that they were fasting. It wasn't just I'm doing this because I need it for my relationship with God. It was I'm doing this because I want other people to recognize me as an important religious person. Okay, so there's a difference there, and that difference makes all the world to God, because he doesn't want that kind of a sacrifice. Those that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth, not public show. And so I'm calling this spiritual showmanship for that reason. But I'm looking specifically here at associations. Growing up, I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit of my background. Growing up, I grew up in a Christian home. My parents got saved before I was born and started attending church. And by the time I came along, they had been there for, and I don't know the exact years, but I'm going to estimate about 5 years or so. And so they had been going to church for a number of years before I came along. And so we were, obviously me growing up, I grew up in the church nursery and all these kind of different things. And there were certain aspects of, I'm going to say some things carefully, but certain aspects of preaching and teaching that basically, to the extreme of basically you have to be isolated from the world. It kind of, more or less, it kind of came out to this effect that world is bad, God is good, and I'm totally for that. Okay, I'm not saying the world is good and you should imbibe everything in the world, but looking at the people of the world and saying those people are bad too, or whatever else, and just don't ever associate with them. And so as we go through our passage here, I think Christ kind of puts a little kibosh on that mindset, because he was around publicans and sinners, and that was something that the Pharisees really got on him and his disciples for. Okay, now there's a lot of things as we go through this that we're going to look at, little tidbits. But what I'm challenging you to do is this, and we're not going to have time to do all of this here, is I actually took a highlighter and I read through all these passages and I highlighted only those portions that are not in any of the other ones. Okay, now my sheet looks like this, just so you know. Okay, this is what my sheet looks like, because there are certain portions that are only in one versus the other. Now you say, well, what does that mean? Why does that matter? It's really interesting because the Gospels are written for specific reasons. It says here the Gospels record Christ's ministry to the four groups of people, then and now in the world. The Jews who love the Scriptures and the prophecies of God, they would only listen to one of their own. So Matthew, in the book of Matthew, speaks to the Jews and the deeply religious of our day. I actually wrote this on the top of my sheet, just so I'm not saying you have to do this, but I wrote under Matthew 9, to the side of that, I wrote Gospel of Jews, deeply religious. Because it's going to be interesting as we go through it to see this pattern develop. Mark instead spoke to the Romans. These were the leaders and leadership, so action impressed them. They knew nothing of the Scriptures, but everything of power. So this group comes the action-packed gospel of the powerful ministry of Christ. The word "and" is used 1,375 times in the book of Mark, showing the basically endless actions of Christ. And he did this, and he did this, and he did this, and he... Like, it's just a string of things that Christ did, and it's supposed to, basically, it's set up in the way to be impressing those individuals who would see that and go, wow, you know, Christ was really busy, he's doing a lot. So I put this next to Mark, it's the gospel of action. If you are interested in action and interested in doing, Mark probably will be the writer, the gospel writer that appeals to you the most. Okay, maybe if you're more religious or deeply religious, Matthew is probably the gospel that you will gravitate to as you read through the scriptures, and especially the gospels. Then Luke is a Greek, and he's speaking to the Greeks. The Greeks love culture, beauty, and ideas. Happiness can be found in the pursuit of truth. Luke fills his book with insights, interviews, songs, details that fascinate the inquiring mind. So today, the truth seekers find Jesus in Luke. And I put there for myself, in Luke 5, across from there, the gospel of accuracy, investigation, and truth. He was a physician, and so a lot of medical terms and medical things take place in the Gospel of Luke, but he was always very precise. He wanted to be really precise about things. He wanted to get the details right. And there's a lot of details in Luke that are not in any of the other Gospels, to that effect. Okay, so just a little something for you as we go through this, because I'm going to highlight some different things and kind of draw attention to it because of that as well. And it might even be something that it's going to trickle over into the morning service as we look at a different passage, but similar idea, and then also trickle over into the evening service, and so you'll probably see some review on that as well. But here Luke is the gospel that we're going to kind of focus on the most. And as we go through this, I'm going to just kind of focus on a few things. I realize you don't have the highlighted portions I have, so I'm kind of looking at the highlighted portions as I go through this. A couple things to note as far as associations in particular, and we're going to get into some of that, but the first thing that is noted here that is not in the other ones is Mark 2, so the middle column. The first verse is not noted in either one of the other ones. Now, it's included in the portion of the Greek text, and so the particular story includes this in the book of Mark, and it kind of gives the background, it gives the introduction of what's going on. And what I find interesting about this is this point, especially dealing with associations, because let me read that verse for us. Mark 2:13 says this. It says, "He went forth again by the seaside, and all the multitude resorted unto him, and he taught them." How does that text interact with our story? What's your thoughts? It's there for a reason or for a purpose, and how does that interact with our story of the call of Matthew and everything else? What might be the potential?
Well, the word multitude sticks out to me, so you have quite a few to choose from.
Okay. Yeah. There was quite a few there. Why did you choose Matthew? Okay. Any other thoughts? When I read that verse, I was kind of working through the whole text, the whole passage. The one thought that came to mind for me as I went through this is, I wonder if Matthew was ever in the crowd when Christ was teaching. I wonder if he was ever there. Because as you go on, the other passages say that he went away from that. It says, and he passed by, so he kind of was done teaching, and he moved on. And here he comes along to Matthew, to Levi. And it kind of strikes me as weird because, why? Could you imagine, put yourself in this situation. For just imagine only, okay? So after we're done imagining, you're done. But let's say you're Christ, okay? And let's say you're in a modern context today. You're walking through the grocery store and you look over at the grocer and say, "Would you follow me?" They're like, "Who are you?" What? I mean, wouldn't it... I'm trying to make this modern for us and put you in this situation. Would there not have been some sort of interaction perhaps before this point of him just coming up in cold turkey calling him? Probably some sort of interaction. I mean, you can search through the Gospels, so you can take some time doing that in your time as well. But I do think we have at least a picture of that perhaps in Mark 2 where Christ is teaching. Maybe he happens to see Matthew in the audience and Matthew's paying attention whereas others aren't. I don't know what it is. But whatever the reason is, clearly, as Howell has already stated as well, there's a multitude there, but why did he choose just one? Why did he choose Matthew? He must have seen something in Matthew that he didn't see in others. Okay, it's a tax collector, and that didn't bode well for him. Which is actually really interesting at this point, because Christ already has 4 fishermen with him. And if you know the history of this, the tax collectors were hated by fishermen, because the fishermen would come and they would, have to pay taxes on that which they caught. And so fishermen and tax collectors, just not groups you would see together. And so it's just very interesting. The whole story, really, if you know the historical context, it's just very interesting. And actually, it kind of brings to light later why the Pharisees and the scribes are trying to prod not Jesus, but his disciples. They're trying to create some issues. But they go to the disciples, not Jesus. And it's interesting. It kind of interacts with the story. But here so you have the Levi sitting there. Christ comes up, and Christ says, "Follow me." Okay, so there's a lot of things that are interesting about this, and I'm just going to kind of breeze through them. First of all, Matthew is the only gospel that actually says Matthew. The other ones say what? Levi. Okay, there's different names. Some refer to this as perhaps being his tribe. He's of the tribe of Levi, which is interesting in and of itself if he was, because the priests and the different ones that would be religious would be from the tribe of Levi. So that's interesting in and of itself, but we'll leave that alone. But what one person kind of brought to attention is perhaps Matthew is the only one who's suited to actually tell his own story. Everybody else kind of almost veils it by saying Levi. You have to kind of know who Levi is to know who he's talking about. And Matthew is telling his story here, and he uses his own name. He says, "That's who I was. That's me." And it would have, so it's putting it in the setting of the deeply religious Jews, Matthew is, I hate to say it like this because it sounds bad in our day and age, he was coming out. Okay? He was saying, "This is what I was." I mean, he's speaking to the deeply religious of his day. You have to understand the impact of him telling the story about himself, saying, "I was a publican, I was a tax collector." And he's giving a testimony about himself here in this, and he's kind of bearing out his story, saying, "This is what I was. This is what Christ changed me from." And it adds power to Matthew's gospel, because he's giving his own personal testimony. And one of the things I think we have to understand when we have friends and associations, the most powerful thing you have with them is your own testimony. They see you day in and day out. They know you for the real you. And if they just got to know you, they will soon know you for the real you, okay? There's certain contexts in which we let our guard down, etc., and people get to see us for who we are. And can I say this? We cannot just be a Christian on Sunday and expect to have friends that turn into Christian friends because of our testimony throughout the week. We have to, by God's grace, have a testimony all throughout the week, and there's plenty of application there for us. But going on further, here is Christ with this testimony, challenges Matthew. How does Matthew respond? Did you see some of those verses? Look at verse 25 in Luke 5. If you move to the middle, you can look there at verse 15, the end of verse 14, but also verse 15. And then in Matthew 9, you can kind of look down there as well. At the end of that first verse there, verse 9. How did Matthew respond? Okay, at once. So you responded at once. Anything else that you see in those passages? Especially the Luke 5, because there's a few portions of Luke 5:25 that are not in the other Gospels. The beginning 4 words of verse 25 says what? In Luke 5, there, verse 28. The first 4 words, it may be different in your version, I don't know. Okay, he left everything behind. Now, this sounds really easy, right? He left everything behind. You know that in that day, obviously you have the fishers, you have the different echelons of people, so to speak. Tax collectors were one of the wealthiest people of that day. because of a lot of times the practice they would get into. You think of Zacchaeus. Remember when Christ called Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus came and obviously invited him to his house, etc. And he said, I'm going to repay people. He had all this wealth, but he still said, I'm going to repay people 4 times whatever I've taken from them wrongly. And he had all this wealth. And you see that about tax collectors, and that's one of the reasons why the rest of the Jews hated them so much. Not only did they get money from the Romans to collect taxes, which made them an outcast, basically, but they would also oftentimes skim off of what the Jews would give them. I mean, they're making money on both ends of the equation, and so not only are they hated, but they're also like pickpocketing and thieves, and it's just like for them. But here he is making a decision to leave everything. He leaves it all behind. He's got the job that most people would dream of, and he leaves it behind. He says, I'm gonna follow Christ. I'm just gonna leave that behind. He left all, he rose up, and he followed him. The immediacy of that. What does he do after he starts following Christ? And we're gonna get into some more of our topic here. What does he do after he starts following Christ? That's the first thing he does. He starts following him, but he also does one thing. Okay, so not only did he leave his job, but now he's giving a big reception, right? So he's giving this big feast. It says in verse 29 of Luke 5, and Levi made him a great feast in his own house, and there was a great company of publicans and of others that sat down with him. So here is Levi with this great feast that he's making for Christ. He invites all of his friends, a great company of publicans and of others. These are the people that he would have associated with, because that's who he was. So here he's associating with these people, and not only is Christ's testimony impacting him, but now we have that Levi's testimony is now going to impact others. He brings all these other people in, right? These publicans, these sinners, these different individuals. He brings them down, and he has this feast for them. But then we're going to get into this a little bit more, because this is where Christ and the disciples then interact with all these people and then are basically castigated by the Pharisees because of this. But there's a few notes I want to make of this in particular. That notice Matthew 9, verse 10. So Matthew 9, that far left column, verse 10, the next verse, the verse there says, and it came to pass. What are the 3 words that follow? I underlined them for myself. And it came to pass, what? Okay, right? The next 3 words specifically are as Jesus sat. So can I ask you this question? Who sat down first? Okay. In the text, and you'll see that all 3 of them have the same story, that Christ and his disciples went and they sat down somewhere. But then look a little bit further where it says at the end of that verse, that same verse, as they sat at meat in the house, behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. Why do you think that's the case? Why did these publicans and sinners take the initiative to walk across the room and sit down with Jesus and his disciples? I say maybe the house wasn't big enough, right? They kind of had to. Is there any significance to that?
Well, probably because Matthew is one of them, and they probably look at it, they're seeing a change in him, so they
Yeah.
sit down and see what's going on.
Right? They're going to see what's going on. There's a certain aspect of this. And so I'm kind of, through this whole passage, we're getting this story, and I'm kind of picking out some different pieces of it. And I understand it's not maybe a traditional message where I have specific points, but we're also dealing with a story. And so as we go through this, recognize here's the interaction between Christ and Matthew, probably on different levels, not just him cold turkey coming up and saying to Matthew, follow me. Then Matthew does. He makes that choice to follow him. And as he does so, he puts out a feast. With that feast, he invites others. Now, I don't know what the invitation said, right? Come see Christ before I leave. What did the invitation say? What did he say to people? What was this feast about? I mean, some people probably didn't really care, right? It's a feast, it's free food, let's go. I'm sure there's undoubtedly layers of people in this. But here, Christ, obviously sitting down, then these people come. And I believe it is because of the testimony and even transformation in Matthew. Now this is only, you're probably dealing with less than 24 hours. Probably. Now, you say, how long does it take to throw together a feast and all this kind of, okay, but here, you're not dealing with a large amount of time. You're not talking about years.
They probably have to take it.
Yeah, probably. I would think so. And probably, since you have 4 fishermen that are already following Christ, maybe, you could just kind of work out a deal with them. I won't pay you taxes. You can just bring food. I don't know, how that would work or interact. But clearly there's a reason why these people came and gravitated towards Christ. So can I make some application for us? As you and I are in the world and as we're just ministering, just being who we're supposed to be, but in the world, are there not going to be people that gravitate to us because they see something different? So let me kind of put this in the context of our Christianity. Sometimes Christians have this mindset of, I'm going to avoid the world, I'm going to stay in my house, I'm never going to go anywhere or do anything, because clearly I don't want to be defiled by the world. Okay, I understand, but there's also another side to this, where instead you get the flip side, so people that react from that and they come over here and they go, well, I'm going to go to the bars and the beaches, and I'm going to go, you got to be in them to win them, so I'm going to go all these different places because that's where the sinners are, and Christ went to the publicans and sinners. Can we see already in the passage that there's a middle ground here that Christ is in? He's not over here where he's afraid of being defiled by Matthew because he called him to follow him. But he's not over here where he is actively necessarily, now let me say that carefully, but where he necessarily is taking that initiative, even at the party, he's sitting down with his disciples, and these other people are coming to him. Okay, so that is significant in this passage. And I understand there were times at which Christ did seek people out, the woman at the well, and other times. So I'm not trying to make that a specific thing, but I think we kind of oftentimes, there's 2 mindsets. There's an extreme on either end. But Christ, I think, had a balanced middle. Whereas association was, he understood that he's going to interact with people in the world. You're going to have to get groceries from somewhere, and some of those people might be unbelievers. Some of them might even say some things that they shouldn't say. It's the reality of life, right? We all want to huddle up and live in a Christian society where there's only Christians, and everybody is not even a Christian, but also somebody who is actively being a good Christian. Okay? There's a lot of bad Christians, right? A lot of people that do some things they really shouldn't do, So here we have Christ sitting, these people come to him, and what then happens? What then occurs? Okay, obviously he has this testimony with them. Who knows what they talked about? Christ probably gave the same message that he gave maybe on the beach there that Matthew heard. And perhaps told them why Matthew is following him and why he's asked Matthew to follow him. Perhaps he's declaring all of this to them. We don't have the names of the people here, but maybe it is that some of these people also became followers, not necessarily in the sense of Christ's inner disciples. But where did Christ get the 70 disciples that he had at one point? They had to come from somewhere, right? Maybe one here, maybe a couple there. We're not told specifically. I know I'm inferring some things, but I don't think my inferences would be far-fetched. So here we have this setting, then somebody comes and talks to the disciples because they're super concerned, right, about the situation that they see developing. What's their question?
They're asking why they asked her why the teacher sits with publicans and sinners.
Okay. Who did they ask? Look at all 3 passages. I underline this in all 3 because it says in the middle there of Matthew 9, it says that they said unto his disciples. In Mark 2, about three-fourths of the way down, it says, and they said unto his disciples. In the last one, Luke 5, it says that they murmured against his disciples, but that phrase could also mean at his disciples. Like it's a flexible preposition, okay, but But clearly there, the authors are trying to say, or the King James translators are trying to say it's against his disciples, and there's an aspect of which, yes, it's against them, but it's also, as we see in those other contexts, to them. Why, if you're asking a question about one person, are you going to somebody else? Okay.
I think they knew at that time they were the match for Jesus.
This is very early on in his ministry. So I understand that they probably learned early on that they were no match. If you continue to read down through Luke, we didn't read down through chapter 6, but they continued to kind of come back and have different specific things that they would ask him. So this is kind of the start of his ministry.
You could take a step further and say that Satan is no match for Jesus.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
Try-
and if he is behind the scenes working with these people, he's gonna take them where they can get a victory out.
Yeah.
Slam right off the bat.
So I guess I'm asking this question. Were they really trying to find out the answer to the question why?
No, they're just messing with the disciples.
Yeah, that wasn't their heart. And we see that continually.
I think they were trying to put a wedge between Jesus and
Sure.
the disciples.
Sure.
Have them start questioning,
Sure.
them start questioning Jesus.
And if they really wanted to know, they would have gone to Jesus, because that's who they're really asking about initially. In Luke 5, it says, the question is, why do ye eat? So plural. But in both of the other Gospels, it actually says, basically, how is it that he, in the Mark passage, but then in the Matthew passage, it says, why eateth your master with publicans and sinners? So there's a perspective here with the question that is directed, while it may have some inference to the rest of the disciples, it clearly has a point, and that point is Christ. Why is he doing that? I don't understand. And they really weren't looking to understand. They were looking more, at this point, to really accuse him. But here, the publicans and sinners, but so just starting out with this question, did Christ seek these people out? Was he not in this situation because he talked to Matthew? Matthew said, follow me, he's going to follow him. Matthew is the one that then initiated and did a feast called Christ to the Feast. So Christ is just coming to the feast. Okay, Christ did not say to Matthew, hey, why don't we have a feast at your house, and why don't you invite all your friends? Okay, he's not trying to throw together some sort of party or whatever. I mean, this is really Matthew's doing. Matthew's in the driver's seat of all this. He has this idea, just as Zacchaeus did as well. It's a custom of the day. But here he's doing all this stuff, and so Christ is just responding to life. He's with Matthew. He goes to Matthew's feast. While he's at the feast, other people come to him. So he's just responding to that which is given him. And yet the Pharisees put Christ instead in the driver's seat, and they said, well, you shouldn't have come to the feast. Okay, that would be rude, number one. You shouldn't have, at the feast, associated with other people. Well, they were the ones that came to him. So you see how ludicrous the question is, so to speak, as you go through there. But what does he finally say with all this? What is Christ's answer or response? And this is telling for us when we talk about associations and we're dealing with all this stuff. What was Christ's response?
I have not called the righteous, but sinners.
Okay. Yeah, his ultimate response was, I'm not come to call the righteous. You Pharisees say you're righteous, you say you don't need anybody. What was the illustration used? There's an illustration in each one of these passages that was used. It's about a physician or a doctor. Okay, so here he says, you don't go to the doctor when you're not sick. These people realize they're sick, so they're willing to accept help. And these people don't. The Pharisees being those other people who are religious and saying, I don't need help. I'm good. But notice Matthew's gospel, because there's one phrase in here that does not occur in the other two. And I highlighted this one. It's towards the end. It's 4 lines up in the middle. It says in verse 13, but go ye and learn what that meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. But go ye and learn what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. You know, Christ gave them a homework assignment. Because why don't you figure out what this means? Do you know if you were to do a search of this phrase in particular, you're going to find multiple times in the Old Testament that these different concepts come up. Mercy, not sacrifice. In Hosea, I'm trying to remember the other passage, but another minor prophet as well. I have some verses in the morning service because we're going to kind of allude to this a little bit as well. But in some of these different passages, it has these same things. And Christ is taking from the Old Testament, and it's funny because what he's doing, if you know, again, what the Pharisees are about what? Oral tradition. They're not about the Scriptures as much as they are the teaching off of the Scriptures. So what does Christ do? Christ goes back to the Scriptures and say, go figure out what this means. I'm going to have mercy and not sacrifice. He's doing multiple things there that I think you can miss if you don't understand some of what's taking place. One of those things is he's giving them an assignment, yes, but he's also not telling them what it means, which is what they would expect, right? Because they're all about not just the Scriptures, but what does it mean? Explain it to me. And Christ doesn't do that. He just says, you go figure it out. If you really want to know, you go figure it out. Here's the phrase you can look up. I will have mercy and not sacrifice.
He's handing them a mystery, right in his color. I will have mercy. Okay, stop there. He's talking about something at that point. Who can give mercy but God? Then you jump down to where it goes past, not a sacrifice. And then it goes to say, for I am not come to call righteous. I am. No one can use I am. He's telling them who he is, and they're not getting it.
Okay. Yeah, he's kind of maybe alluding to some of that as well. But he clearly in this passage as well, just kind of giving him that nugget of truth to say, like, here's a scripture verse to look up. It's kind of like if I were to quote the scripture verse and say, you go figure out what it means. You go look into this. Of course, most people would say, well, that's kind of your job to do that, is to expound that and whatever else. But I notice many times throughout the scriptures that Christ doesn't do that. He doesn't get into that mindset of, well, that's his job to do that, because he's the teacher. No, he says, if you really want to know, you go figure it out. I'll give you the starting point, but that's all I'm going to give you. The rest is up to you. And it really is a very interesting thing. So Hosea is one of these passages multiple times throughout there. There are like 4, 5, 6 times through the book of Hosea that it says, I will no more have mercy, or I will have mercy. I will have mercy. I will have mercy upon our children. I will have mercy upon the house of Judah. I will have mercy. And God is basically judging them and beginning that judgment process and calling for them to respond as well here in this as well. So if you look in some of the context of that, Romans 9:15 also says this. It says, for he saith unto Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion upon whom I will have compassion. That's in Romans 9. But it reminds us too of this, I think, because the Pharisees their heart was about judging. And don't get me wrong, because the publicans and sinners, there definitely was a lot there to judge, right? They were doing things wrong. But what was Christ's whole perspective at the end here? He says, well, there's hope for them, whereas there's really not hope for you. Here are these people who are spiritually supposed to be the echelon, the top echelon of spirituality in Jerusalem at that day. And he's basically telling to them, he's telling them, there's not hope for you, there's more hope for these. In fact, later on he says, something to the effect of how, a rich man is not going to enter in, but other people can. There's other aspects of this that he continues to bring out through his ministry where he continues to come back to the same thing over and over again. And really, I guess I'm kind of, in a sense, wrapping it up with this, because we do have to be done, is this particular attitude and how that affects our relationship with others. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. The Pharisees went into judging the sinners. Christ came to seek and to save that which was lost. there was a particular difference in their ministries, and obviously I would recommend Christ's ministry instead. It's kind of like in 1 Corinthians 13, we'll look at this passage this morning as well, but 1 Corinthians 13 where it says, if you give your body to be burned, and you give all your goods up, but you have not love, it profits you nothing. Relationships with others is more than just sacrifice. There's a heart that goes behind it, and that heart is one of not passing judgment, and it doesn't mean you cannot pass judgment, but you can't pass that judgment aspect where you're judging or condescending, but instead you're meeting and ministering to the specific needs that they have. You know what sinners do? Sinners sin. I'm not recommending that Christians sin, but I do expect people in the world to sin, to say things they shouldn't, to do things they shouldn't. And can I say this? It really is not, and I think this is what Christ also is getting at when we looked at first, where no man puts a new garment to old and all this kind of stuff. Christianity is not about just changing the outside of somebody. I have seen this more times than not, unfortunately, that there are ministries in which they're just glad if they can change the outside of a person. For instance, if they can get a person to put on a suit and tie and come to church, that is a victory, only because they're putting on a suit and tie to come to church. They're only worried about the external because that's really all that they're looking at. Whereas Christ, obviously here and in these different passages, is not concerned as much on the outside as he is on the inside. Right? Where does Christianity, true biblical Christianity start? It starts on the inside and works its way out. I'm not saying it doesn't have applications to the outside and to what people see. But understand that it has to start somewhere. It starts on the inside. And here Christ is giving them an assignment, and I honestly, I would give you the same assignment. Go find out, what does that mean? I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Specifically when we're dealing with other individuals, publican sinners, those that we rub every single day, the associations of our life, how does that phrase interact with how we should interact with them? What does that do? How should it change us? And Christ is challenging them because it should have changed the Pharisees. But as we see, unfortunately, through Christ's ministry, it really did not. Instead, they were ultimately judged because they disregarded Christ's teaching. So showmanship, associations. Can I ask this question? Are you afraid of people seeing you have or be around people who are less than perfect? You say, well, my Christian friends are going to think. Yeah, well, I think that gets back to I will have mercy and not sacrifice, because we're all less than, I mean, you're going to start square one. And
I know, there's like two circles of people that you associate with. I associate with my brothers and sisters, but then there's people that aren't my brothers and sisters that I associate with. And when they come together, I realize that there's people who aren't brothers and sisters. They may say things that my brothers and sisters don't know.
yeah.
But that's on them, it's not on me.
Sure. That doesn't mean we necessarily have to go and seek out. I think sometimes we get this mindset too that I have to go and seek out every lost person and whatever else, and I have to be in all the bars and beaches and strip clubs and whatever else. I have to be in all those places because that's where the sinners are. So I have to go there. Okay, you're going to interact sinners wherever you go, and it's really more how you interact with them when you interact with them than trying to grab at all these different people. And God will probably lead each one of us, God is going to lead each one of us to those specific people that perhaps he wants us to work with. Why did Christ choose Matthew over somebody sitting right next to him? That's who he's supposed to choose. And every single one of us needs to respond to, have that testimony, but also respond to God's work in our own life, and not be concerned about, not being so concerned about being defiled that we might have some public sinner around us and be less than perfect, or be seen as something that's less than perfect. And instead, allow God to, through us, minister to people's lives. I think it's so interesting, and I'll end on this, is that as Matthew was called and followed, it affected so many other people. You go to the passage. all the different publicans and sinners and others that were affected because of just one man. And how that happens. It's so neat to see that happen when God changes just one person and the lives that rotate around that person that are then affected. Some are changed, perhaps some don't want that change, but it's just a neat thing, and God means to do many things through that, I think, even in our day and age as well. So, associations. All right, let's close the word of prayer. Thank you, Lord, for the fact that you associated with publicans and sinners, that you were there when they were there as well. You weren't concerned about being defiled, but instead that you were ministering to them as was appropriate. And Lord, I pray that you help us to be in the balance of Scripture, not to be with somebody who claims to be a believer, who is choosing actively to sin, as Scripture reminds us not to do, but instead that we understand that if we have to go out of the world because of publicans and sinners, then we're not going to be able to associate with anybody. And so, Lord, I pray that you just ministered around our hearts. Help us to look up and realize the phrase, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, and apply those truths to